welcome back once again. I'm Dr. Shauna Babro here with Rey Grand. And Rey, you mentioned physical therapy and going through physical therapy. Could you elaborate just a little bit more on what that was like for you? And then we'll talk a little bit about how the meningitis affects the brain and the spinal cord and that inflammation. We'll elaborate more on that, but if you could just expound more on the physical therapy aspect of what you are now going through.
Absolutely, Dr. Shauna. So the physical therapy was a bit short, and so the reason being is because the doctors diagnosed me as a complete, which means I was completely paralyzed, versus an incomplete, where if I was incomplete, I could have some movement in my legs. So therefore, they had me focus more on adapting to the wheelchair and that lifestyle. However, I advocated for myself through my parents, and I wanted to fight to get some physical therapy done to work on my legs. And the way that looked was it was like a standing frame where they would strap me in and have me stand up straight. And also they had orthopedics size me for some braces where they would actually my legs would lock straight, and then I would able to use a walker and then stand up and then lock the brace. The braces would lock and I was able to walk, but I was able to walk moving my hips, and then I moved my hips and then my leg would move one by one. So it actually wasn't my brain sending a signal to move. It was actually the hips moving the legs. And so that pertained mostly of my physical therapy. And it was a process within itself, but in my mind, I always believed that I would walk, and having faith with that.
Right, absolutely. And we're going to discuss that more and take a look at a pictorial illustration of the brain and the spinal cord and exactly what happens when a person does get meningitis, coming up shortly here. But no doubt, just the mental, taxation that comes with that, that's a lot to process and a lot to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, even to this day, it built a lot of mental toughness, because every day I wake up, it's the same process of me moving my legs to get up. And I can feel like the signals of like some sensation of my legs wanting to move,
right,
in my mind, because the mind is that powerful. But like you said, it can be very taxing, and it takes a lot of courage, faith, and perseverance to continue to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's very interesting that you mentioned that, mentally you can, feel the signaling, so to speak, or the sensation. Like mentally your mind is telling your legs to move, but then it's not happening. And it's an interesting, thing that happens when we're talking about, the central nervous system, which really is the very first thing that's developed when we're in utero. And when we look at what happens, there's a very, the meninges, what happens with meningitis, as I mentioned before, it's an inflammation of that very thin membrane, and it does create some inflammation in the brain, and it can travel down through the spinal cord, and that entire membrane can become inflamed and create what's called, in your case, spinal meningitis. So with anything, when it comes to symptoms and making a diagnosis, often timing is of the essence, and to be able to know exactly what disease is being fought, what the protocol is going to be, is important. And fortunately, with in your case, it wasn't a complete paralysis to where you're still able to move your arms and move your upper body and your upper limbs, but of course your legs were affected. And what happens is, as that inflammation starts to attack, the nerves, and the nerves that control certain parts of movement within the body, it becomes so inflamed that it basically damages, those nerve endings, and at that point, it's no longer responsive. There is no longer a signal, from the brain to the nerve ending to say, when your brain is saying, move your leg to the right or move your leg to the left, that connection, that communication has now been damaged, and there's no longer that communication that typically tends to happen with our central nervous system.